Amina's life was simple, but full of hope. Growing up in a small village surrounded by endless fields and the laughter of her family, she dreamed of a future filled with love and happiness. She was kind-hearted, gentle, and full of faith that everything would fall into place one day. But life, as she was about to learn, had plans far more complicated than her dreams. Her family had struggled for years, and when the chance came for her to marry Musa, a man she had never met, the weight of their hopes rested on her shoulders. The marriage was arranged by her parents, who saw Musa as a successful businessman from the city, a chance to escape poverty, to bring stability to their lives. At first, Amina's heart fluttered with a mix of fear and excitement. She imagined that love could grow with time, that this stranger might become the man she'd always wished for. The wedding day was a whirlwind of color, music, and blessings. The village gathered to celebrate, singing songs that echoed through the hills. Amina wore her dress, the intricate beads sparkling in the sunlight. But deep inside, a small voice whispered doubts she tried to ignore. When Musa finally appeared, he was polite but distant, his eyes never quite meeting hers, his smile never fully reaching his face. Still, Amina held on to hope, believing that the true man would reveal himself once they were alone, once the wedding songs faded into quiet nights. But the days that followed were colder than she imagined. Musa's home in the city was grand, filled with luxury but empty of warmth. He spoke little, often disappearing for hours, leaving Amina alone with her swirling thoughts. His kindness was sparse, and when it came, it felt forced, like an actor reciting lines. Her heart ached for connection, but all she found was silence. At times, Musa's words were sharp and his patience thin. He questioned her in ways that made her question herself, her worth, her place in his world. Friends and distant relatives whispered warnings she wished she hadn't heard. "Be careful," they said. "He is not who he seems." But Amina's love, fragile and desperate, kept her clinging to the hope that the man she married would change. She wanted to believe in him, in their future, in the promise of a life together. Yet, every night, when the city lights dimmed and she lay alone in the vastness of Musa's cold bedroom, the loneliness wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. She missed the warmth of her family, the sound of familiar voices, the safety of her old life. The doubts grew louder, turning into fears she couldn't shake. Who was this man she married? Was she just a stranger's possession, a pawn in a game she never chose to play? And most terrifying of all, what if she had lost everything already? The truth was creeping closer with every passing day, a shadow she couldn't outrun. Amina's story was only beginning, but the pain she was about to endure would test every ounce of her courage. In a world where love was supposed to heal, hers was becoming a trap, tightening around her heart and soul, threatening to suffocate the very dreams she once held dear. Amina tried to hold on to the hope that Musa would show his true self, the man she was promised to marry. But as the days passed, the cracks in their relationship grew wider and impossible to ignore. Musa's coldness became a constant, his silences longer, and the rare moments when he spoke were filled with sharpness and impatience. He controlled every detail of their life, from what Amina wore to whom she spoke to. The freedom she once cherished was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Her heart ached with loneliness, and the walls of the grand house felt more like a cage. She found herself walking on eggshells, careful not to anger him, fearing what might come if she did. Friends and relatives noticed the change. Some whispered their concerns. Others stayed silent, afraid to interfere in what seemed like a private storm. Amina's family called often, their voices full of worry, urging her to be strong, to speak up if things turned dark. But how could she? She was trapped between love and fear, hope and despair. One evening, after a particularly cold dinner where Musa barely spoke to her, Amina overheard a conversation that shattered her fragile trust. She heard voices talking about debts, lies, and secrets that Musa had hidden not just from her, but from everyone. It was the first real glimpse into the man behind the mask, a man with a dangerous past and enemies she never expected. Panic gripped her chest as the walls closed in. She realized that her marriage was more than just coldness. It was a prison, built on lies. Trying to confront Musa only made things worse. His anger flared, and the home she thought she could call safe became a battlefield. Amina's dreams of love and happiness faded into a daily struggle to survive, to keep her spirit alive in a place that threatened to break her. The isolation deepened as she faced the harsh reality that no one around her fully understood what she endured. Each day was a test of her courage, each night a prayer for escape. The stranger she married was not the man she had hoped for. He was a mystery wrapped in shadows, and she was caught in the middle, fighting to find light in the darkness. Amina tried with all her heart to believe that Musa's coldness was just a phase, that beneath that distant exterior, there was a man who cared for her, who loved her in his own way. But as days turned into weeks, the walls of their relationship closed in tighter. Musa's silences weren't peaceful moments, they were heavy and suffocating. He rarely looked at her, and when he did, his eyes were hard, as if carrying burdens she was not allowed to know about. The grand house they lived in, filled with expensive furniture and sparkling chandeliers, felt more like a lonely fortress. Amina missed the laughter and warmth of her village, the simple joy of family dinners, the carefree days where hope seemed endless. Here, in this cold mansion, she tiptoed around Musa's moods, never knowing what would trigger his anger or silence. Her days were filled with routine, but the routine was painful. She would wake, dress carefully in the clothes he approved, eat meals in near silence, and spend long hours alone in rooms too big to hold one woman's sorrow. She tried to reach out to find solace in friends or family, but Musa's control stretched beyond the walls. He monitored her calls, questioned her about every visitor, and his suspicion was like a chain around her neck. One afternoon, Amina's cousin Zuri came to visit. Zuri was vibrant and full of life, a stark contrast to the heaviness in Amina's world. When Musa arrived home unexpectedly early, his eyes narrowed at the sight of Zuri. Without a word, he pulled Amina aside and whispered harshly, "You will not bring outsiders here again." Fear washed over Amina, but she nodded silently. She knew better than to argue. That night she lay awake, tears burning her cheeks as she whispered a prayer for strength. The next morning, Amina decided she couldn't live like this. She had to understand what she was truly trapped in. She began paying closer attention to Musa's routines, overhearing hushed phone calls where his voice dropped low and tense. One evening, while Musa was in another room, she found a drawer slightly ajar. Curiosity battled fear in her chest, but she couldn't resist. Inside, she found documents, papers revealing debts, threats from unknown men, and letters filled with anger and warning. Her hands trembled as she realized Musa was not just a cold husband, but a man tangled in dangerous troubles. When Musa found her going through his things, his face twisted into something fierce. "How dare you invade my privacy?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Amina backed away, heart pounding, but refused to show her fear. "Why? Didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this from me?" she demanded softly. Musa's eyes darkened. "This is my business. Stay out of it." From that moment, their home changed again. Musa's coldness grew into something darker, quick flashes of anger, accusations, and silence that crushed Amina's spirit. She tried to confide in her family, but the shame and fear held her back. Who would believe her? A stranger's wife, trapped far from home, with no one to turn to? As days passed, Amina's loneliness turned into dread. She started fearing the nights, the quiet hours when Musa's shadows seemed to fill the room, when the silence was louder than words. One night, a terrifying scream shattered the quiet. Musa had thrown a glass against the wall after a minor disagreement, the shards glittering like broken dreams on the floor. Amina sat trembling, clutching her chest, wondering how love could turn into this storm. The community around them whispered rumors, but no one dared intervene. The stigma of a broken marriage in their culture was harsh, and Amina felt trapped not just by Musa, but by society's unforgiving gaze. Yet, beneath the fear, a small fire kindled inside her, a fierce determination not to let this stranger destroy her. She began secretly reaching out to a kind neighbor, Mama Tandi, who listened without judgment and offered words of hope. Mama Tandi told her, "You are stronger than you think, Amina. This is not your fate." With each passing day, Amina fought the battle inside herself, between fear and hope, despair and courage. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but deep inside, she was starting to believe she could survive this nightmare. But fate had more challenges in store. One morning, as she prepared breakfast, Amina overheard a phone call that would change everything. Musa's voice was sharp, speaking to someone she didn't know, arranging to hide money and avoid debts. The truth hit her like a storm. Her husband was a man running from his past, and she was caught in his web. Fear clenched her heart, but also clarity. This was no longer about love or marriage. It was about survival. As she stood alone in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through the window, Amina made a silent vow. She would find a way to break free, to reclaim her life, and to protect her heart from the stranger she married. Her journey had only just begun. Amina's world was unraveling faster than she could catch her breath. The truth she had uncovered about Musa was just the tip of an iceberg that threatened to drown her in despair. She realized her marriage was not just cold and lonely, it was dangerous. The man she married, the stranger who promised her a new life, was hiding secrets that could destroy everything she held dear. Each day brought fresh reminders of how trapped she was. Musa's debts weren't just numbers on paper, they were threats from men who didn't hesitate to use violence. Amina began noticing the shadows lurking outside their grand house, the mysterious calls that left Musa restless and angry. One afternoon, a stranger came knocking on their door, demanding money. The man's voice was harsh, his eyes cold and unforgiving. Musa's reaction was terrifying. He shut the door with a slammed force and locked every window, as if trying to keep the outside world and the danger at bay. But Amina knew it wasn't enough. The danger was inside their walls, in the man she had married, and in the silence that suffocated her every hope. Desperation pushed her to seek help, but where could she turn? Her family was miles away, and the city felt like a maze of strangers. The neighbors whispered but kept their distance, unwilling to interfere in a marriage clouded by shame and silence. Even her closest friends urged her to stay quiet, warning her of the consequences if she spoke out. Amina's spirit wavered. Could she really escape the prison she had stepped into? One evening, after a bitter argument, Musa's anger erupted like a volcano. Words turned to shouts, and shouts to threats. Amina stood frozen as he accused her of betrayal, accusing her of things she hadn't done, twisting the truth to justify his cruelty. Her tears fell silently, but inside she was screaming. That night, as she lay awake in their cold bed, the weight of her fear crushed her. She thought of her childhood dreams, now shattered by a stranger's lies. But in the darkest hours, a spark of resilience ignited. Amina refused to be a victim. She began to plan quietly, gathering strength from memories of her family's love and the kindness of a few trusted friends. She knew the road ahead was dangerous, filled with obstacles and heartbreak, but she also knew she deserved better. With trembling hands, she wrote secret letters to her family, asking for help. She reached out to Mama Tandy, who became her lifeline in the storm, offering advice and shelter. The days blurred into a tense waiting game. Musa's mood swings grew worse, his temper unpredictable. But Amina held on to her plan, determined to protect herself and the life growing inside her, for she carried not just her own hope, but the promise of a new beginning. Then came the night that changed everything. Musa returned home later than usual, his eyes bloodshot, his steps unsteady. Amina sensed something was terribly wrong. That night, their home became a battlefield. Words turned to violence, and the fragile walls of their marriage crumbled completely. Amina found herself fighting not just for love, but for survival. The pain, both physical and emotional, was unbearable. But as dawn broke, she made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She would leave, no matter the cost. The next morning, with a heavy heart but fierce determination, Amina packed a small bag, clutching her secret letters close. She slipped out of the house before sunrise, the cool morning air biting at her skin, but filling her with a strange hope. She didn't know where she would go, or what awaited her. All she knew was that she could no longer stay trapped by the man she married, the stranger who had stolen her dreams. As she walked away from the life she thought she wanted, tears streamed down her face. Tears of sorrow, but also of courage. Amina's story was no longer about loss. It was about fighting back, about reclaiming her life and dignity. And though the road ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let herself be lost again. The moment Amina stepped out of the house that morning, she felt the weight of her decision crashing down on her. Leaving Musa wasn't just about walking away from a man. It was leaving behind a life she had never truly lived, a future that had been promised but never delivered. The city stretched out before her like a vast, unforgiving landscape. The bright lights and busy streets were no comfort. They only reminded her how alone she was. Her heart pounded with fear, but also with a fragile hope that this escape was the first step toward freedom. As she navigated the crowded market, clutching her bag tightly, the reality hit her hard. She had lost everything overnight. Her home, her husband, her security, and the life she thought she knew were now gone. People's eyes followed her, some filled with pity, others with judgment. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. Amina felt the sting of each glance, the weight of every whispered word. She was the woman who married the stranger, the one who left with nothing but a broken heart and an uncertain future. Her phone rang constantly. Messages from her family, from friends, from strangers who wanted to help or warn her. But amidst the chaos, Amina struggled to find a place to rest, a safe haven where she could breathe and gather her strength. Mama Tandy's home became that sanctuary, the warm embrace of an older woman who had seen much pain but refused to be defeated, reminded Amina that she was not alone. Over cups of bitter tea and quiet conversations, Amina shared her story for the first time aloud. The pain spilled out, the betrayal, the loneliness, the fear. And with each word, she felt a little lighter. But the community around her was not always kind. Gossip spread like wildfire, twisting her story into something unrecognizable. Some blamed her for her troubles, saying she should have stayed silent or accepted her fate. Others whispered about the shame she had brought upon her family. The cultural expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. In this world, a woman's worth was often measured by her marriage and her ability to endure hardship silently. But Amina was different. She refused to be a victim of circumstance. She reached out to local support groups, women who had faced similar battles, and learned that her strength could inspire others. The months that followed were a brutal test. She struggled to find work, to secure shelter, to protect her unborn child. Nights were the hardest, filled with memories of happier times and the painful reality of her loss. Yet, in every challenge, Amina found resilience she never knew she had. She rebuilt herself piece by piece, drawing on the love from her family and the kindness of strangers. But the shadow of Musa's control was never far behind. Rumors circulated that he was searching for her, angry and vengeful. Amina lived in fear that her past would catch up, that the stranger she married would drag her back into darkness. Yet she pressed forward, determined to create a new life, one where her child would grow up in safety and love. Her journey was far from over, but each day brought new hope, new strength, and the promise that she would never again lose everything overnight. After leaving Musa's home, Amina stepped into a world that was both unfamiliar and unforgiving. The city, once a place of promise, now felt like a maze filled with shadows and uncertainty. Every step she took was weighed down by the fear of being found, the dread of what Musa might do if he discovered her escape. Yet, beneath the fear, a fire burned, a determination to survive and reclaim her life. The days were long and exhausting. Finding work was a challenge. Many doors closed as soon as her story leaked. She faced judgment, suspicion, and sometimes outright rejection. But Amina refused to give up. She took odd jobs, cleaning, cooking, selling handmade crafts in the market, anything to earn enough to keep a roof over her head. The kindness of strangers became her lifeline. Mama Tandi, an older woman from the neighborhood, took her under her wing. With her gentle words and unwavering support, she gave Amina the strength to face each new day. "You're stronger than, you know," Mama Tandi would say, "and this pain will one day be the story of your strength." But the struggle wasn't just physical, it was a battle within. Memories of Musa's cold gaze, the sharp words, and the moments of violence haunted her nights. The silence of the grand house was replaced by the quiet hum of the city, but loneliness remained a constant companion. Friends she once trusted were distant or afraid to stand by her. Yet, in the darkness, new friendships blossomed. Women who had walked similar paths shared their stories and their wisdom. Together, they formed a support network, a sisterhood bound by shared pain and hope. Amina learned to stand tall, to speak her truth, and to dream again. One day, as she sat by a small stall selling her crafts, a man approached. He was kind-eyed and soft-spoken, James, a local teacher who volunteered at community centers. He offered not just friendship, but a glimpse of what trust and kindness felt like. Slowly, Amina began to open her heart again, though the scars of the past remained. As her pregnancy progressed, so did her resolve to protect her unborn child. She attended prenatal classes, learned about motherhood, and dreamed of a future where her child would know only love and safety. But danger lingered. Musa's influence extended farther than she had imagined. Threatening messages arrived, and shadowy figures appeared near her new home. The fear of being found never left her, yet Amina refused to be paralyzed by it. Instead, she worked with local women's groups and the police to create a safety plan. Each challenge strengthened her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a new beginning, a life free from fear and pain. With every obstacle, Amina grew stronger, her spirit unbreakable. The stranger she married had tried to steal her happiness, but she was reclaiming it piece by piece. Her story was one of survival, courage, and hope, a beacon for those trapped in silence, reminding them that even in the darkest nights, dawn always comes. Amina's days were filled with cautious hope, but the shadows of her past loomed large. She knew that surviving Musa's wrath wasn't just about running away. She needed to find a way to protect herself and her unborn child permanently. One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings she had managed to save, Amina stumbled upon a small, hidden envelope tucked inside a book Musa had left behind in the house. Her heart pounded as she carefully opened it, revealing a stack of papers and photographs. As she examined the documents, the truth began to unravel before her eyes. Evidence of Musa's illegal dealings, debts, and the threats he had been hiding. Among the papers was a letter from a dangerous creditor, warning Musa that failure to pay would have severe consequences. The photographs showed meetings with shady men, transactions that explained the phone calls and whispered threats she had overheard. Amina's hands trembled, but beneath the fear was a growing determination. This was the proof she needed, the secret weapon that could change everything. She realized that with this evidence, she could not only protect herself, but also bring Musa to justice. But acquiring this proof was dangerous. Musa was volatile and unpredictable, and if he discovered she had it, the consequences could be devastating. Amina carefully hid the envelope in a secure place and confided in Mama Tandi. Together, they devised a plan to keep the evidence safe and prepare for the moment when it would be needed. At the same time, Amina began gathering support from local women's groups and community leaders. She shared parts of her story in confidence, raising awareness about domestic abuse and the need for protection and justice. Each step she took was a risk, but it was also a step toward reclaiming her power. One evening, as Musa made an unexpected visit, Amina's heart raced. He was angry, suspicious, and demanding answers. She kept her calm, carefully hiding her fear. When he stormed through her belongings looking for the missing papers, she pretended ignorance, deflecting his questions with quiet strength. The confrontation was intense, and Amina knew she was playing a dangerous game. But her resolve was unshakable. The evidence she held was her lifeline, her hope for freedom. As days passed, Amina worked closely with the police, providing the documents anonymously and setting in motion legal steps to protect her and her child. The tension grew. Every knock at the door, every unexpected visitor filled her with dread. Yet, amidst the fear, there was also hope. Hope that justice would come, that the man who had trapped her would be held accountable. Amina's journey was far from over, but with each secret uncovered and each ally gained, she moved closer to the freedom she so desperately sought. The stranger she married had tried to destroy her, but now, armed with truth and courage, she was ready to fight back. Her story was no longer one of loss. It was a story of power reclaimed and a future reclaimed. And as she prepared to face the storm ahead, Amina knew one thing for certain. She would never be silent again. The day of confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Amina's heart pounded in her chest as she prepared herself mentally and physically for the battle that lay ahead. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the safety of her unborn child, for the chance to reclaim the life that Musa had tried to steal. The community buzzed with whispers, some in support, others casting doubt on her courage. But Amina stood tall, determined to face the storm with the strength she had cultivated over months of struggle. Musa arrived at her small, secure home, unannounced, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He demanded to know where she had hidden the papers, his voice shaking with rage. But Amina, no longer the frightened girl who had walked into a stranger's arms, met his fury with calm and resolve. "I'm done hiding," she said firmly. "I have the proof. The truth will come out." The confrontation escalated quickly. Words became accusations, and accusations threatened to turn violent. But Amina had prepared well. With the support of local authorities and her newfound allies, Musa was met not with silence, but with the law. The evidence she had uncovered was irrefutable. Musa's debts, illegal dealings, and threats were exposed to the community and the police. The man who had once held her captive with fear was now on the defensive. But the fight was far from over. Musa's anger turned to desperation, and he tried to manipulate the people around him, spreading lies and attempting to discredit Amina. But the community, seeing the strength and courage she displayed, began to rally behind her. Her story inspired other women trapped in silence to speak out, creating a wave of support that Musa couldn't ignore. In the courtroom, Amina stood tall, her voice steady as she recounted her ordeal. The judge, moved by her bravery and the evidence presented, ruled in her favor, granting her protection and ensuring that Musa would face the consequences of his actions. The victory was bittersweet. The scars of the past couldn't be erased overnight, and the journey to healing was just beginning. But Amina knew she had taken the most important step, reclaiming her voice and her power. As Musa was led away, in handcuffs, Amina felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The stranger she had married was no longer a threat, but the memories remained. Yet, with the support of her family, friends, and community, she looked toward a future filled with hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The woman who had once lost everything overnight was now a beacon of strength and resilience. And as she prepared to welcome her child into the world, Amina knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one written by her own hand, full of love, courage, and freedom. The courtroom was tense as Amina took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady, carrying the weight of months of pain and courage. She recounted the coldness, the control, and the hidden dangers lurking behind Musa's charming facade. Every word she spoke chipped away at the illusion Musa had built around himself. The judge listened intently, and the room hung on her every sentence. Musa's defense was weak, full of angry denials and desperate attempts to twist the truth. But the evidence, the letters, photographs, and testimonies from neighbors and friends painted a damning picture. As the trial unfolded, a shift occurred. Those who had doubted Amina began to see the strength behind her story. Supporters from the community spoke up, sharing their own stories of struggle and survival, forming a chorus of voices demanding justice. Outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered, not just to witness the verdict, but to show solidarity. Women, who had suffered in silence, stood tall, inspired by Amina's bravery. The verdict finally came. Musa was found guilty on multiple charges. Protective orders were put in place, ensuring Amina and her unborn child's safety. Musa's world, once so full of control and threats, crumbled under the weight of truth. But the end of the trial was not the end of the story. Amina's journey toward healing had just begun. Returning home, she felt the weight of what she had lost, but also the promise of a new beginning. Mama Tandy's embrace was warm and steady, a reminder that she was not alone. James, the kind teacher who had slowly become a friend, offered steady support, reminding her that love and kindness still existed. Amina started rebuilding her life slowly, focusing on her health and the life growing inside her. She found work teaching at a community center, sharing her story to inspire others. Her courage became a beacon, lighting the way for many trapped in silence. The months passed, each day bringing new challenges, but also new joys. The birth of her child was a moment of pure light, a symbol of hope and resilience. Holding her baby in her arms, Amina knew she had fought through darkness to find this moment of peace. Though the scars of her past remained, they no longer defined her. She was a woman reborn, strong, fearless, and free. And as she looked toward the future, she promised herself one thing: she would never let anyone steal her happiness again. The stranger she married had tried to break her, but Amina had emerged victorious, a testament to the power of hope and the strength of the human spirit. Her story, once filled with loss, was now a story of survival, empowerment, and the unbreakable will to live and love on her own terms. After the courtroom verdict, a heavy silence settled over Amina's life, a silence that was not empty, but full of meaning. She had won the battle against Musa, but the war for her soul and future was just beginning. The days after the trial were a blur of emotions. Relief washed over her in waves, but beneath it lingered a deep exhaustion from months of fear, pain, and uncertainty. Returning to her small apartment, Amina felt the absence of Musa like a shadow stretching across every corner. The grand house, once cold and imprisoning, was now a distant memory. Here, in this humble space filled with soft sunlight and quiet hope, she began to rebuild. Mama Tandy's visits became a comforting ritual, bringing warmth and wisdom. "You have endured much, my child," she said one afternoon, brushing Amina's hair gently. "But you have also been reborn. This is your new beginning." Amina's days took on new purpose. She poured her energy into preparing for motherhood, attending prenatal classes, and nurturing the little life inside her. The fear that had gripped her slowly loosened its hold, replaced by a fierce determination to create a better world for her child. At the community center where she worked, Amina found joy in helping others. Sharing her story wasn't easy, but it became her strength. Women who once suffered in silence reached out, finding hope in her courage. Among the new faces in her life was James, the gentle teacher who had stood by her side through the darkest times. His kindness was a balm to her weary heart. Slowly, their friendship blossomed into something tender and true. A love built on respect, trust, and shared dreams. But healing was not linear. Some nights, memories haunted Amina's sleep, flashes of fear, pain, and betrayal. She wrestled with doubt and guilt, questioning if she was strong enough to move forward. Therapy sessions helped her navigate these storms, teaching her to forgive herself and reclaim her peace. The birth of her child was a moment of profound joy and relief. Holding her baby in her arms, Amina felt an overwhelming sense of hope, a promise that life could be beautiful despite its hardships. The child was a symbol of survival, a beacon lighting her path forward. Family ties that had once been strained began to mend. Her parents welcomed her back with open arms, their pride in her resilience shining through tears. Friends returned, offering support and celebration. The community that once whispered judgments now cheered her triumph. Amina's story became a testament to the strength of women everywhere, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, dawn awaits. Musa's presence faded like a distant storm, powerless against the new life she had built. Though scars remained, they no longer defined her. She was free to love, to hope, and to dream. And as she watched her child grow, surrounded by love and laughter, Amina knew that she had won the greatest victory of all, reclaiming her life and her happiness. Her journey from pain to empowerment was a beacon for all who felt trapped by circumstance. The stranger she married had taken much from her, but he could never take away her spirit. Amina's story, once filled with loss, had blossomed into one of hope, courage, and new beginnings, a powerful reminder that no matter how dark the night, the morning always comes. The courtroom verdict marked a turning point, but it did not magically erase the scars Amina carried deep inside her heart. The days after Musa was taken away in handcuffs felt surreal. Though the threat was gone, the memories of the cold nights, the controlling silence, and the fear still echoed loudly in her mind. She sat by her window often, watching the city bustle below, wondering how she had survived such darkness and yet still found a flicker of hope. Her apartment, modest and quiet, was a refuge unlike the cold mansion that had been her prison. Yet, the loneliness settled in during the silent moments. Mama Tandy's visits were a balm for her soul. Warm tea, gentle stories, and steady encouragement. "You have crossed the storm, child," Mama Tandy said one afternoon, folding her hands. "But the healing begins now." Amina nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She was tired. So tired. But beneath that fatigue, a small flame of resilience refused to be extinguished. She dedicated herself to preparing for motherhood, learning everything she could about caring for her unborn child, determined that this baby would know love and safety. At the community center, she found purpose. Teaching young girls, sharing her story of survival and hope, She became a light for others, still trapped in silence. The woman she was before, the frightened girl who married a stranger, felt like a distant memory. Yet her wounds reminded her daily of the battles she had fought. James, the gentle teacher, became a steady presence. His kindness was a new kind of love, one built on trust and respect rather than fear. Slowly, hesitantly, Amina allowed herself to hope again. But healing was never simple. Nightmares haunted her sleep, dreams where Musa's shadow lurked just beyond reach. She often woke with a start, heart racing, tears wet on her pillow. Therapy sessions helped her untangle the web of fear and guilt. The process was painful but necessary. Learning to forgive herself for surviving, to accept the pain without letting it control her. As the months passed, Amina's belly grew, and so did her strength. The community's support grew too. Women who once whispered their secrets in fear now spoke openly, inspired by her bravery. The birth of her child was a moment unlike any other. A surge of pure love and hope washing over her as she held her baby close, vowing to protect and cherish this new life above all else. Her family's bonds mended slowly. Her parents, once worried and distant, were now her pillars. Friends returned, offering laughter and celebration. The whispers of shame faded into stories of triumph. Yet, even as she rebuilt her world, the shadow of Musa's past lingered. Threatening calls and dark rumors tried to pull her back into fear. But Amina was no longer the woman who ran. She faced these threats with courage, supported by the police and her community. The stranger she married had tried to break her, but she emerged unbroken, stronger and wiser. Her story became one of survival and empowerment, a beacon for every woman who dared to dream of freedom. And as she watched her child take their first steps, surrounded by love, Amina smiled through the tears, knowing she had won the greatest victory of all, reclaiming her life and her happiness. The road ahead was still long, but she was ready. No longer trapped by the past, she looked toward the future with open arms, knowing that her spirit was unbreakable, her story one of hope, courage, and new beginnings. The courtroom's heavy silence after the verdict seemed to echo inside Amina's chest, a bittersweet calm after the storm she had weathered. Musa's cold gaze, once a source of terror, was now filled with defeat as the law closed in on him. Yet the weight of months of pain, fear, and betrayal was not so easily lifted. As the officers led Musa away, the crowd outside stirred. Some whispered words of sympathy for Amina, others cast glances of judgment, reminding her of the complex social webs she had to navigate. Returning to her small apartment that evening, Amina was engulfed in a silence far different from the mansion's oppressive cold. This quiet was hers, but also daunting. Memories clung to her like shadows, the harsh words, the chilling silences, the nights of dread. She sat by the window, tracing raindrops sliding down the glass, letting tears flow freely. Tears for the girl she once was, for the dreams stolen, for the strength she was only just discovering. Mama Tandy's warm visits became lifelines. The gentle rhythm of her voice, the aroma of herbal tea, the steady hands folding her worries into comfort, all grounded Amina. "You have faced the storm, child. Now you must learn to breathe again," Mama Tandy whispered one afternoon, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Slowly, Amina embraced the long, slow process of healing. She devoted herself to her unborn child, attending prenatal classes, reading every book she could find about motherhood, determined that her baby would grow in love and safety. The community center became her sanctuary, a place where she taught girls about resilience and self-worth, sharing fragments of her story to ignite hope in others trapped in silence. James, the kind-hearted teacher, was a steady presence, never rushing, always patient. His gentle support was a new kind of love, one built on trust rather than fear. Amina's heart, once closed and guarded, began to soften. But healing was a turbulent journey. Nightmares of Musa's looming figure haunted her sleep. The silence of the night was often broken by gasps and tears. Therapy sessions, painful yet vital, helped her unravel the knots of guilt, shame, and fear she carried. She learned to forgive herself, to accept the past without letting it control her future. Each session was a battle, but also a victory. As the months wore on, her belly grew, and so did her resilience. The community's whispered doubts turned to cheers as more women found courage in her example. Amina's story spread, not as a tale of defeat, but as a beacon of empowerment. The birth of her child was a moment of pure light. Holding the fragile life in her arms, Amina felt an overwhelming surge of hope. The baby was a symbol of survival, a promise that love could triumph. Even in the darkest places, family wounds began to heal. Her parents embraced her with pride and renewed love. Old friends returned with tears and laughter. The weight of shame lifted, replaced by stories of strength and survival. Yet shadows still lingered. Threats from Musa's past surfaced, calls in the dead of night, strange figures near her home. But this time, Amina did not run. With the support of local authorities and her community, she faced the threats head-on, fortifying her life with courage and vigilance. Musa's grip on her life was broken, but the scars he left were reminders of battles fought and won. Amina stood as a symbol, a testament to the power of resilience and hope. Her story was no longer about loss, but about reclaiming life on her terms. Watching her child take first steps, surrounded by love and laughter, she smiled through tears. She had reclaimed her happiness, her freedom. The future was uncertain, but her spirit was unbreakable. With every sunrise, she chose hope, strength, and love. She was no longer a stranger's wife. She was Amina, a woman reborn, a mother, a survivor, a beacon for all who dared to dream of freedom. Even after Musa's arrest, the echoes of her past life didn't fade away quietly. The courtroom's verdict was a victory, but it was only the beginning of a long road to healing. As Amina stepped out of the courthouse, the eyes of the crowd felt like heavy weights pressing down on her, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. She was not just a woman who had suffered abuse. She was now a symbol in a community divided between tradition and change. The world outside was the same, yet different. Familiar faces now looked at her with whispers behind their hands. And yet, some women nodded in quiet solidarity. Amina knew that winning in court was one thing, but reclaiming her life on her own terms would be a battle fought every day. Her small apartment, modest and warm, became her sanctuary and her prison. The silence inside was not peace. It was the calm after a violent storm. Nights were especially hard. When darkness fell and the world quieted, memories of Musa's, sharp words and cruel silences flooded her mind. She would wake in cold sweats, heart pounding, trembling beneath her blanket. Yet, with each morning, she found a renewed strength. Mama Tandy's visits were a lifeline. The older woman's steady presence reminded Amina she was not alone. "You carry the fire of survival, child," Mama Tandy said one afternoon, pouring her a cup of tea infused with herbs that smelled like home. "Let it burn away the pain and light your way forward." Amina clung to those words as she began to rebuild. She immersed herself in learning about motherhood, determined that her child would be raised in love and safety. The community center where she worked became a haven, a place where she helped other women find their voices. Her story, once whispered in shame, was now shared openly, inspiring others to break free from silence and fear. James, the gentle teacher who had become a friend, was a quiet light in her life. His kindness was a balm to her wounds. Slowly, her heart began to heal, though scars remained hidden beneath smiles. Therapy sessions peeled back layers of guilt, shame, and fear. Amina learned to forgive herself, To accept that surviving did not mean she was weak, it meant she was brave. She faced each memory with courage, turning pain into power. Yet, healing was not linear. There were days when darkness threatened to swallow her whole, nights when tears came unbidden. But with every challenge, she grew stronger. As her belly grew heavy with life, so did her resolve to create a future free from fear. The support from the community blossomed. Women who had suffered in silence now raised their voices alongside hers. The birth of her child was a triumphant moment, a new life filled with hope. Holding her baby close, Amina felt the weight of the past lighten. Her family's love began to mend old wounds. Parents who had worried and doubted now showered her with pride and affection. Old friends returned, eager to support and celebrate. The whispers of shame faded into songs of strength and survival. But the past was never far behind. Threats from Musa's shadowy debts still lurked. Ominous calls and mysterious figures reminded her that freedom was fragile. But Amina no longer trembled. She faced these dangers with a fierce determination and the protection of the law and her community. Musa's grip was broken, but the scars remained, reminders of battles fought and won. Amina stood tall, a beacon of hope and resilience. Her journey was no longer about loss. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit to rise, rebuild, and reclaim joy. Watching her child's first steps, surrounded by love, she smiled through tears. She had survived the darkness and found her light. The future was uncertain, but her heart was unbreakable. She was no longer a stranger's wife. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman reborn. And in her story, countless others found courage to believe in their own strength and freedom. The air was different now. Lighter, warmer, filled with the quiet promise of new beginnings. Amina sat on the porch of her small home, the soft sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting gentle patterns on the ground. The month since Musa's arrest had been filled with struggle and growth, but she was finally feeling a peace she hadn't known in years. Her baby had grown strong inside her, kicking with life and hope. Every movement was a reminder of the future she was fighting for, a future built on love and freedom, not fear. The community that had once whispered and judged now celebrated her courage. Women she had met through the community center came by with meals, laughter, and support, a sisterhood born from shared struggles. James, the gentle man whose kindness had quietly blossomed into love, sat beside her. Their hands intertwined, a silent promise of partnership and healing. Together, they dreamed of a future filled with joy and possibility. Amina had returned to her roots in many ways. She reconnected with her family, who embraced her with open arms, their pride and love a balm to her weary heart. Old wounds were healing, mended by forgiveness and understanding. She also began volunteering more at the center, helping other women find their voices and strength. Sharing her story became a mission, a beacon of hope for those trapped in silence and fear. The nights were still sometimes haunted by shadows of the past, but Amina had learned to face them with courage. Therapy and meditation became her tools for peace. She understood that healing was a journey, sometimes slow, sometimes painful, but always worth it. The birth of her child was a moment of profound joy. Holding her baby close, she felt an overwhelming sense of love and hope. This new life was a symbol of survival and resilience, proof that even after the darkest storms, the sun would rise again. Amina's story was no longer one of loss and fear. It was a story of strength, empowerment, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to be broken. She had married a stranger and lost everything overnight, but she had found herself, in the process, stronger, wiser, and free. As she looked toward the horizon, the future stretched out before her, full of promise, possibility, and hope. She was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. The soft glow of dawn crept through the curtains as Amina stirred awake, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. The quiet of the morning was a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind, yet inside her chest, a new kind of excitement fluttered. The anticipation of life, of hope, of new beginnings. Each day since Musa's fall from her life had been a testament to her strength, a journey marked by small victories and painful lessons. But today felt different. Today was about embracing the peace she had fought so hard to claim. The small home she now called her own was modest, but filled with warmth. Handmade curtains, colorful cushions, and a small garden bursting with vibrant flowers. All signs of the life she was rebuilding piece by piece. James was already up, quietly preparing. Breakfast in the kitchen, his soft humming a soothing melody that made Amina smile even before she opened her eyes. Their relationship was still new, delicate, yet full of promise. There was no rush, no pressure, only a shared understanding that this was a fresh start, built on respect and gentle affection. As she sat by the window later, cradling her belly, memories of the past tried to surface, but she gently pushed them aside. They were not meant to shadow this new chapter. Instead, she focused on the moments of joy. The baby's first kicks, the laughter of friends who had become family, the support of the community center where she worked tirelessly to empower other women. The center was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary. Here, she met women from all walks of life, each with their own stories of struggle and survival. Together, they created a tapestry of resilience and hope, breaking the silence that once bound them. One afternoon, as she spoke at a gathering, Amina shared not just her story, but her vision. A world where no woman would suffer in silence, where courage and love could triumph over fear. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to find their own voices. Healing was a continuous process, and some days were harder than others. Nightmares occasionally visited, bringing fleeting shadows that she met with newfound strength. Therapy sessions became a place of release and growth, where she learned to embrace her scars not as weaknesses, but as badges of survival. Her family had become her anchor. Her parents, once distant and worried, now celebrated her courage with tears and smiles. Siblings who had been silent began to reach out, mending fences and building bridges of understanding. Love, in many forms, surrounded her. The birth of her child was a moment she would carry forever, a miracle that symbolized hope rising from the ashes. Holding her baby for the first time, she felt a love so fierce and pure it healed wounds she hadn't realized were still open. As the months passed, Amina and James nurtured their growing bond. Their love was gentle but steady, a promise of companionship that brought light to her once dark world. They dreamed of a family, of laughter-filled days and peaceful nights. The future was no longer a place of fear but of endless possibility. Yet, Amina remained vigilant. The past had taught her to protect her heart and her child fiercely. With the support of the community and law enforcement, she had built a safety net, ensuring that threats from her past could not reach her again. Her story became a beacon, shared in gatherings, whispered in homes, and told in the safe spaces she helped create. Amina was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a warrior of hope and resilience. She had married a stranger and lost everything overnight, but in that loss, she found her true self, stronger, wiser, and free. As the sun set over her small garden, casting golden hues across the sky, Amina looked toward the horizon with a heart full of gratitude. The journey had been long and arduous, but every step had led her here. To peace, to love, to a life reclaimed. She smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, she would face it with courage, surrounded by those who loved her and fueled by the unbreakable spirit within. As the story of Amina draws to a close, it's important to pause and reflect on the powerful journey she has taken. a journey that mirrors the experiences of so many women across the world. From the moment she said yes to a stranger, her life was turned upside down. She faced betrayal, fear, and isolation, but through it all, she found an incredible strength within herself. Her story is not just about pain, it is about resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman, determined to reclaim her life. When we hear stories like Amina's, we are reminded that behind every struggle, there is courage waiting to shine. It takes immense bravery to step out of darkness and into the light, to break the chains of silence and stand tall. Amina's courage is a beacon for anyone feeling trapped by their circumstances. Her story teaches us that no matter how lost or broken we feel, there is always a way forward. Every step toward healing is a victory. Every tear shed is a step toward freedom. We see how community, kindness, and support can make a world of difference. Amina's journey also shows us the importance of speaking up and seeking help, even when it feels impossible. It reminds us that no one should suffer in silence, and that together, we are stronger. For those watching or listening who might see themselves in Amina's story, know this: you are not alone. There is hope, help, and a future waiting for you. A future filled with love, safety, and new beginnings. This story also calls on all of us to be allies, to support those who face abuse and injustice, and to create a world where no one has to suffer alone. The power of Amina's journey lies in its truth, a truth that resonates deeply because it is real. It is the story of many, the story of resilience, and ultimately, the story of triumph. As we close this chapter, let us carry forward the lessons learned, the strength to fight, the courage to heal, and the hope to rebuild. Let us honor the spirit of those like Amina, who dare to dream of freedom and a better life. Thank you for joining us on this emotional and inspiring journey. If Amina's story touched your heart, share it with others. Help spread the message that courage and hope can change lives. Remember, every story shared is a step toward breaking the silence and building a world filled with compassion and support. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the power of your own story.